I'm going to repeat some of these just because I really just didn't remember them. Mailing of copy of satisfaction piece to judgment debtor within 10 days after filing. Execution of satisfaction piece by attorney for creditor within 10 days after entry of judgment. Civil penalty for failure of judgment creditor to execute and file satisfaction piece within 20 days after receiving full satisfaction, unless New York City, they got to do a written demand first. Entry upon return of execution arising out of a small claims action within 20 days after receipt of judgment by sheriff. Leave to issue execution, that's not on the test. Expiration of judgment lien existing against real property at the time of judgment debtor's death, and it expires 2 years after the death or 10 years after filing of the judgment roll, whichever is last. These are civil time rules that are not 20 days, although I might mention some 20-day ones, beginning with Article 50. Okay, so mailing of copy of satisfaction piece to judgment debtor within 10 days after date of filing. Execution of satisfaction piece by attorney for judgment creditor within 10 days after entry of judgment. Civil penalty for failure of creditor to execute and file satisfaction piece. On failure to comply within 20 days after receiving full satisfaction. But in New York City, there has to be a written demand first if New York City is the creditor. Entry upon return of execution arising out of small claims action within 90 days after receipt of judgment by sheriff. That's in 5021 sub B. Expiration of judgment lien existing against real property at the time of the judgment debtor's death. It expires 2 years thereafter or 10 years after the filing of the judgment roll, whichever is last. So again, the expiration of the lien against real property at the time of the debtor's death expires 2 years after the death or 10 years after the filing of the judgment roll, whichever occurs last. Service of restraining notice. If notice to the debtor has not been given to the debtor or obligor within 1 year before service of the restraining notice, they have to send a copy of the notice and the notice to judgment debtor, so two separate things, the copy of the restraining notice and the notice to judgment debtor or obligor shall be mailed by first-class mail or personally delivered to each debtor or obligor who is a natural person within 4 days of service of restraining notice. So again, this is talking about notice to judgment debtor or obligor and a copy of the restraining notice, and it has to be done within 4 days. 4 days after service of the restraining notice. That's in 5222 sub D. Return of answers to information subpoena within 7 days after receipt. Deposition or examination of books and papers, not less than 10 days notice unless court orders shorter notice, and that's in 5224. So just to note, typically in any post-judgment proceeding, the service can be done by registered or certified mail, return receipt requested, or by personal service. So this is an interesting one in that it's talking about mailing by first-class mail or personal delivery to the debtor within 4 days after service of the restraining notice, because the type of service is atypical. Deposition or examination of books and papers, again, this is in 5224 sub C, not less than 10 days notice unless the court orders shorter notice. Okay. A subsequent examination within 1 year requires leave of court, but again, this is in 5224 sub F. A return of execution to the clerk or support collection unit. This is in a couple of sections. It's in 5230, 31, and 32. And it's done within 60 days after issuance. Again, return of the execution to the clerk or support XCU within 60 days after issuance, and it may be extended in writing by the creditor's attorney or by a support collection unit for not more than 60 additional days. Accounting by sheriff of monies collected, at least once every 90 days from the time a levy is made. And that's in 5231 sub K. A voidness of levy. And at expiration of 90 days after service of execution or as provided by court. This is in 5232 sub A. As to debts paid to the sheriff or SCU, or as to which proceeding under 5225 or 5227 has been brought. So those are the exceptions. So 5225, that is... Okay, so 5225 is payment or delivery of property of judgment debtor. So basically that's when it's being served on someone other than the debtor. And 5227 is that's just the payment of debts owed to judgment debtor. So and 5227 is the one with the special proceeding. You actually have to commence a special proceeding because you're bringing in someone who has nothing to do with the original action. In 5225, you also have to commence a special proceeding because you're bringing in a person that just has property in their possession that has that the creditor has an interest in because the debtor has an interest in. And the same thing for 5227. When the person owes money or a debt to the judgment debtor, you have to commence a special proceeding. So that's why these two are an exception to the voidness of levy. So at expiration of 90 days after service of execution, the levy becomes void, except when it's 5225 or 5227, when there's been a special proceeding brought. Because those debts have actually been paid to either the sheriff or a sport collection unit by someone other than the debtor. Okay, 5232, another crazy 4-day rule here. Service by sheriff or SCU of copy of execution and notice to debtor or obligor. So that's when they have to serve the copy of the execution, and then they also serve the notice to judgment debtor within 4 days after service of execution upon the garnishee. That's in 5232 sub C. Priority of other judgment creditors. For 60 days after the order is filed, unless otherwise specified by order or extended within the 60 days. So they get 60 days priority, these other judgment creditors, in 5234, if order is filed before property or debt is levied upon. So obviously, if the debt is already levied upon, then they're not getting the 60 days. Okay, so 5235, levy upon real property, 10 years after the filing of the judgment roll. Okay. Sale of real property levied upon. Between the 56th and 63rd day after first publication of a notice of sale. And that's in 5236. Sheriff's delivery to purchaser of proofs regarding sale and deed. That's within 10 days after the sale. That's also in 5236, subdivision F. Okay, so 5402, filing of the foreign judgment must be done within 90 days of the date of authentication. 5403, mailing of the notice of filing within 30 days after filing of the judgment, and the proceeds shall not be distributed earlier than 30 days after filing proof of service. So basically after service is complete and you file the proof of service, then there's an additional 30 days waiting period. Okay, so now 5513, taking appeal as of right or moving for permission to appeal. That's within 30 days, but if the attorney dies within the 30-day period or becomes suspended or whatever, then it's extended to 60 days from the date of the death. Time for taking cross appeal is the same 30 days or within 10 days after service of the notice of appeal or motion for permission, whichever is longer. So if you weren't going to appeal, let's say, you're the plaintiff, you won, you didn't really win as much money as you wanted to, but you figured you'll cut your losses. But then once you receive the notice of appeal from the defendant, you're like, you know what, I am going to move. I'm going to appeal. I'm going to make a cross appeal. You don't have to do it. If he served it to you on like the 29th day, you get another 10 days because it's whichever is longer. So you get an additional 10 days to file a notice of cross appeal. Okay. What is next? This is a lot of stuff I have notes on about e-filing, which I'm not gonna do because I just have so many videos on the rules. It's just out of control. I do want to mention one thing though, because it is in my appeals video. I keep talking about, in that video, I talk a lot about the required copies of the brief, and that's because each department has their own rules about the copies. For example, the Court of Appeals, you have to have 9 copies.